Hi, welcome to another episode of You're Hired. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, and today we have an amazing guest. We're going to have a very, very, very deep conversation about some of the underpinnings of our economy. I'm very excited. But again, welcome to another episode of You're Hired, where we talk about jobs and careers and all the issues related to it. I hope you all had a good week, and let's get to it. So I want to talk about my guest before I introduce him, because he is truly probably one of the most extraordinary guests we've had. I'm going to read a quote about our guest before I bring him on. This one's from Time. Ashoka's Bill Drayton is widely credited with pioneering charitable support for social entrepreneurs, innovators whose ideas can leverage small cash investments into large and self-sustaining improvements in a society's health or education or housing. From Forbes, Drayton runs Ashoka like a business. He is an immensely talented organizer. I love that. And by David Brooks. And if you know David Brooks, he's a columnist for the New York Times and a few other places. He's on television a lot. And he's definitely a conservative guy. And this is what he says about our guest, Bill. If you are trying to pass legislation, you staff your administration with political operatives. But if you are trying to change the discussion and mobilize the country, you hire and promote social entrepreneurs, people from Ashoka. That's David Brooks. That's pretty amazing. That to me is pretty amazing. And I'm going to read my last one from Bill Clinton, who I think was a great president. And he talks about the organization that our guest created, was the founder of. Ashoka's power comes from its 3,000 fellows and from the compelling vision of my longtime friend, Bill Drayton. I've met Ashoka fellows all around the world. I witnessed their innovative work. Their efforts make me incredibly hopeful about the direction in which our world is headed. Because Ashoka fellows not only solve problems, they inspire others and create pathways for people of all ages and all walks of life to be changemakers themselves. That is amazing. So today our guest is Bill Drayton. He is the founder and CEO of Ashoka. Ashoka launches and unites the world's leading social entrepreneurs, over 3,700 startups and counting. They bring big systems change to the world's most urgent social challenges. Over half of the entrepreneurs have changed national policy within 5 years of their launch. Bill was a consultant with McKinsey, which is a high-end consulting company, if you don't know them, and has taught at Stanford and Harvard, which are two pretty prestigious universities. If you haven't heard about them, then turn off the radio. Bill was an assistant administrator at the Environmental Protection Agency and also chairs Get America Working. We're going to talk about that. He graduated from Harvard, Oxford, and Yale Law School. Bill, welcome to the show.
Lauren, thank you so much.
So glad you can make it. And we're local to you. Bill walked or drove like 12 blocks to get here because he's here in Roslyn. So how you doing?
Terrific. I just admire what you do. You really are encouraging people to step up and be change makers. That's what you do.
I hope so. I know that we've done a couple of shows here where people have actually gotten jobs and good jobs. So why don't you give us a little bit of background? I mean, I know right now there's a couple things you're working on, and we're going to talk about all of it. There's some really, and I'll tell you how, the reason that we're talking to Bill today is because I have been thinking about the unemployment number, right? For my entire life and for your entire lives, you've heard about this number called the unemployment number, and it is constantly quoted in the news. And it's either between like 4% and 10 or 11%, something like that. And you know, if it's more than 8 or 9% or 10%, it's really bad. And whoever the president's doing a bad job. And if it's below 5%, then things are good. Well, I thought that was kind of bull. That just did not make sense to me. So I started looking at what the unemployment number means. And in fact, it is bull. It does not, if it's a number that we as a society are going to look to as a reference point to tell us what policies we need around helping people get jobs or job creation, it needs to be a better number. And so we're going to talk about that with Bill. And also, we support folks doing what it is that they love. So if you're listening to the show, we want you to have a great job, and we want you to enjoy your job. So we're going to talk about that as well. So Bill, tell us what you're working on now at Ashoka.
the rate at which change is accelerating is just a mathematical fact, is exponential and has been since 1700. So that's fact one. Fact two, the demand for repetition is going down exponentially for 300 years. And we are now at a point where the old way of doing things, give people a skill, banker, barber, whatever, then they go and repeat it for the rest of their lives in workplaces with walls that's very efficient if there's very little change. But it completely doesn't work now. Every person, organization, system is bumping all the others faster and faster, broader and broader, more and more connected. That's a fact. That's the new environment. And this just is falling apart. Over half the Fortune 500 companies don't exist anymore. 15 years.
Right, so 15 years ago, if you look at the Fortune 500, they are not around anymore.
Half of them.
Yeah, and Fortune 500 are big companies with lots of money and lots of people. Where'd they go?
When a system falls apart, you know the Roadrunner keeps going?
Yeah.
The cliff is behind them?
Uh-huh.
Well, people have in their heads the old system. And because all the pieces of the old system are there, it keeps functioning. But every year, more and more pieces fall off because they die. And some escape and become part of the new system. So that's part of the tipping process, the negative part. Then the positive part is that the new parts are doing really well. The companies, the individuals, there's a bidding war. You know this, for people who have the skills to create value through change. There's a bidding war. And on one hand, salaries are going up for people who have these skills. At the other end, hundreds of millions of people are dropping off the edge because they can't play in the new game. So we're at this amazing turning point. And when you get to the turning point, it really goes quickly. So our central goal is to help everyone. And we mean everyone, not just everyone in the elite, but everyone. It's very radical. Everyone a changemaker is Ashoka's goal. Everyone has got to be able to see the new game, to have the skills to play in it. We've got to organize in teams of teams, not hierarchies, no walls. That's what works. I mean, you look at Silicon Valley and Bangalore, or you can even look at some of the very early organizations that got to this. The Jesuits are a team of teams. They're 500 years old. So we're right there. Now,
well, let's look at some of these things, because you're talking about some really important stuff, and I don't want to gloss over it. So one of the things that you're talking about is the difference between repetition versus
change-making.
Change-making. So repetition is doing kind of the same thing every day and maybe doing it a little bit faster, but basically doing the same thing to produce something, right? And one of the ways I want to take a look at this, because I was just, as you were talking, it came to me, teachers, right? So when I was a kid in elementary school and junior high school, it was kind of the same. My dad was a teacher, and so was my aunt, and it was kind of the same thing every year after year. But now a friend of mine who teaches in junior high school, it's constantly changing. What they do is constantly changing. It's gone beyond the role of just a teacher. Is this what you mean?
Maybe I'll just tell you a story. It is totally critical for people in their teens to actually be change makers. Mm-hmm. To know that.
But wait, is that what you're talking about when I say that?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I get the reference right, because some people are listening, and I think that they need to have a reference for what we're talking about, because this isn't something that's in the dialogue yet. So you're saying, kids.
Here's a fact. I'll get to the story in a second. 80% of the Ashoka Fellows started something in their teens. We looked at LinkedIn and identified 360,000 people who said they'd started something in their teens. 4 times as likely to be a C-level, chief executive, chief information officer, 5 times as likely to be a founder or co-founder. It's really clear that if you have that experience when you're 12, you get your power. You have it for life. In a world that's defined by change, that is the definition of success in growing up. So here's the story. We have something called Ashoka's Youth Venture, which is designed to help any young person do this. So we had a meeting down here at Georgetown's Mount Vernon campus, about 350 young people. And I was sitting down at lunch, and this very tiny young woman comes down and sits to my right. She very quickly introduces herself and says, "I'm 12," because she's sick of people thinking she's 8. Okay, so what's your venture? Well, my brother's autistic, and all through school I would cry, and she made that gesture.
And the gesture is putting her finger on the edge of her eye and pulling it down.
Yes. And now we've fixed that. Well, how did you do that? Well, we get together whenever we see a special student who's not being treated well, and we figure out what to do, and then we go and do it, and we're very persistent. Now, if you had been there, you would not have one cell in your body doubting that she has her power for life. You can just hear it. Please give me a problem. She's not going to be afraid of anything. And she is a change maker. She knows it. She's brought a whole group of other kids along with her. I asked her one more question. How many student groups are there in Shirley Middle School? Shirley is a very poor rural community. The plastics industry left.
Where's that?
North Central Massachusetts. The plastics industry went away. Nothing came. So this is not an elite school. So how many student groups are there in Shirley Middle School? Oh, over 50. Mm-hmm. Now, how many middle schools do you know, or high schools for that matter, that have 50 student organizations? So what happened is that when she, at 11, entered that school, she had a problem. And everyone said to her, "You've got a problem. Oh, think of the solution. Build a team. Go and change it. Look around. That's how the way the world works." And she was being recruited. "Come and join our organization. We'll show you how to do this, or use our service, listen to our virtual radio station," whatever. So the whole community was an Everyone a Changemaker community. And by the time she was 12, she had her power for life. People are always going to want her because she has the change-making skills. Cognitive empathy, living for the good of all. 1, very sophisticated teamwork. An opposite type of leadership. Envisage, enable, ensure. Not a smart person telling everyone else what to do. And then change-making itself. She has that.
Let's break those things down, because those are some of the fundamentals of what change making is. And for those of you who are listening, we are talking to Bill Drayton right now about change making. And their tagline is "Everyone a Change Maker," which is that everyone who's listening to this radio show, all 4 of you, can make change in the world. Right, Afote?
Yes, sir.
Afote is a change maker. That's our engineer. So let's break down the specific things. So one of them, my favorite, is empathy. Empathy is not sympathy. Empathy is about, and I'll give my definition, you can give yours. Empathy is me experiencing what it is to be you. It's not me thinking what it's like, but actually experiencing and feeling what it is like to be you in that specific moment. And in feeling what it's like to be you, I can relate to you in a way that is much more effective, much more powerful. So how do you define empathy?
So we're very careful to use the phrase cognitive empathy because we're all born with a cerebral cortex and mirror neurons. Everyone has that.
Right.
But what you have to do is get them to work together, and that's a learned skill. And if I look at you and you're looking miserable, and all I have is my mirror neurons going off, the same places in my head light up as in yours, and I feel miserable. Well, guess what I do? I focus on me being miserable.
Right.
This is not very helpful, and I'm contagious to the people around me.
Right.
On the other hand, if the two have come together, I look at you being miserable, I say to myself, why is Lauren miserable? I think I can figure this out. I can help him. So I do not have any of the pain points coming alive. I have things that make me healthy and happy because I'm expressing love and respect in action. Now, this is the most fundamental skill. You can't do teamwork or new leadership, any of that stuff, without this. Furthermore, this is the first generation ever that nobody can be a part of society without this. Up to now, you could be a good person by diligently following the rules. But as the rate of change accelerates, and the context that we're in is not 4 or 5 stable contexts for life, but this kaleidoscope of teams coming and forming and morphing, if you don't have this skill, you are going to hurt people. You are going to disrupt groups. And the people who know how to play the game don't want you around. And it's your fault. And anyone who looks like you, they don't want around either. We are experiencing that right now. All over the world. People have no idea what the new game is. They don't have the skills to play it, and we're not giving it to them. It is if we knew what we were doing, it would be criminal to allow any child. Cognitive empathy starts as very young children. You've got to master it and practice it. How many elementary school principals do you know that they're failing if they have one second grader who is not grasped and isn't practicing this skill? It's not part of their game. They're being measured on information transfer and no mayhem in the hallway, i.e. ruliness. This is a classic case that you've got to change the framework. There's got to be a new definition of what a successful parent, a successful school is doing.
So what do we do? I do want to talk more about this. What do we do about adults who have not mastered empathy? Because I don't know how many of us have met those folks. In fact, I believe a lot of business owners don't have empathy, which in some ways makes them effective in this old model of not being deterred by no, but also being able to kind of make it on their own and carrying people along the way. What do we do about those folks? How can we get someone who's in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who doesn't really have a sense of what empathy is and help them out?
It's a really hard question. If you have enough of the skills, you can build on it. And the people you and I know, our friends, have enough of the skills that we can all build. But what do you do if people just don't have any idea? So I am optimistic, but it's a really hard question.
Right. And where you're focused on really are the people, young kids, where it's the easiest to kind of get in there and make this difference because it's natural to them, right? The Z generation, they're naturally more empathetic, would you say?
Well, it's a learned skill. You have to.
It's a learned skill.
And if the kids around you are doing it, and the whole culture, if you're in a school and the other kids don't have this skill and they feel uncomfortable, their reaction is aggression. And aggression invites aggression. And every time you go through that cycle, you get further away from this sort of living. And that's part of what we've got. So adults, let me just give you an example. We actually, any organization, it could be religious or business or whatever, they have to hire for change making now, new set of skills. They have to help their existing workforce become change makers, otherwise they're toast. They also have to organize in fluid teams of teams or it doesn't work. So there's 3 things they just have to do. So here's how we can help any organization. What do people care about? They care about their kids more than anything else. 80% of the U.S. workforce is not emotionally committed to their work, 85% in Europe. But they do care about their kids. So I'm just going to describe a specific event. This is with about 40 machinists in a company that wants to change. Local manager introduces world of change. We've got to do it, but that's not what this is about. This meeting is about your kids. Introduces us. world of change. Then we bring a 15-year-old person, in this case, a young woman, and for 5 minutes she tells her story. When we were in third grade, we thought war was a really bad idea. We wanted to get people across national lines to talk. So we sent letters to people in other parts of the world, and no one answered. Sad. Fifth grade, we tried again. A young woman in South India responded, and then it becomes a platform. 5 minutes later, Daniela sits down. Everyone in the room knows they have just seen what they want their daughter to have her power, to be a contributor, to be a change maker. And then we go quickly into how you as a parent can do something about it. Your 12-year-old comes home, says no one listens to us, the way immigrant kids treated is awful, kids don't understand math. I'm really proud of you for seeing that problem. How do you think you could solve it? Draw her out a bit. Well, why don't you, that's a really good idea. Why don't you get your friends together and go and do this? Who, me? Yeah, you can do this, and here's why this is important.
So the workers who are working with their kids to have them become change makers, then in themselves become change makers.
That's exactly right.
Because they're learning these skills. So, which is great. I mean, teaching someone something is a great way to learn it. So one of the things we know about this, and I wanted to get back a little bit, we have the empathy component, and then there are two other components. What's the second component?
Very sophisticated teamwork.
Talk about that a little bit.
When you have, in the world we are now in, someone or several people see a new opportunity. You then have to very quickly, you don't have a year, you have maybe a couple of weeks to pull together a team. And you're going to pull people from wherever, whatever parts of the organization, from outside the organization, that wall also disappears. It'll make the best team. Well, you now have to deal with this new team of teams, and you don't know these people, and that team doesn't repeat for the next 10 years.
Right,
it
and we're seeing this in the gig economy. We're seeing this, that people are moving to this gig economy where people are just going to do something for a while for a company and then move on and do something else with a company. So this is happening.
A third of our workforce is in the freelance area.
Right.
And, one of the Ashoka colleagues is Sarah Horowitz, who created the Freelancers Union. So absolutely. But the same thing is true inside organizations. The concept of inside and outside organization also becomes suspect. It doesn't make sense.
Right. So, a worker's a worker. Someone contributing is a contributor.
To take this same company I was with the machinists I was describing earlier, if a machinist who loves hockey sees something, in the world of hockey, they're starting to treat the fans differently. Oh, I wonder what that might mean for how we treat ourselves or treat our suppliers or whatever. Well, if you've got all your people open and seeing patterns and opportunities and constantly coming together, that is what an everyone a change maker organization is. And if you don't have that, you're blind and inflexible. You won't survive.
Right. So in part, when we're talking about teams, you're talking about a movement from the hierarchical approach to organizations where there's a boss and their boss, and then the boss below that, and then the people who kind of listen to the bosses, and there's that one-way communication, to a group of people that are interdependent and are working together with an equal say in what actually occurs.
Okay, think of a basketball team.
A good basketball team?
A good basketball team.
What's a good basketball team?
Each person...
What's a good basketball team, Afote?
Oh, right now?
Yeah.
Cleveland Cavaliers.
All right, the Cavaliers. All right, I'm thinking about the Cavaliers.
Boy, this is a high standard, but every player, they have to make decisions. The ball comes to you. What are you going to do? You've got to know where all the other players are, who they are, their strengths, their weaknesses, and the situation. You have to make a decision right then, and you do it trying to strengthen all the other players. You're not doing it for the moment, you're doing it for the game and all the games. So this is a really simple example.
That's a really good point. A lot of jobs now, the results are not, they come instantaneously, but there's also that longer term result that folks are focusing on. That if you're doing something, there is a now result, but then there's that month result, the year result, and that really is where the focus is, and it has to be there if we're talking about creating organizations that are going to last. Because if we just keep thinking about today, we're not going to be focused on anything that's beyond ourselves, which is exactly what you're talking about. You're saying, hey, me as a team member, I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about the organization. I'm thinking about my teammates. How can I have them win? If they win, the organization wins. If the clients win, then I win.
And what you need is everyone thinking that way and everyone being able to act that way. It's not just the manager, Henry Ford, telling everyone. Everyone all the time is thinking, how do I help all the other colleagues be better change makers? How do we, in these morphing groups, how do we all get better at this? So what is leadership? The first thing is you help people see, here's a really big opportunity. You're really good at seeing the patterns. That's the first thing that empowers all the other team members. And you invite team members. The moment they're there, they're helping with sharpening the vision. You've got to help build the synaptic architecture so the team can work together. This is a totally new team. But then everyone on the team is helping refine and strengthen and adapt. This is just the opposite of the old world. It's not one person telling and then everyone else repeating. It's everyone being, here's the vision. We can strengthen it. And just as you say, it's the faster things change, the further you have to look into the future.
So the notion of a team is bigger than what we have conceived of in the past. There are no bosses, right? There are players on the team. There was a really interesting article about indigenous American Indians. One of the reasons that it was so difficult for the American military to defeat them is because they didn't operate with a single head. That they were like small groups, and the shaman, who was kind of like the leader, wasn't even them. They really weren't even the leader. Everyone was empowered to be the leader. And when everyone is empowered to be the leader, they can operate more nimbly. Another example is like and I quote the notion of terrorism because I don't like using that word, but smaller groups that can operate independently without consulting someone are more effective.
But they're even more effective if they do communicate and they do help one another.
But they don't need the same hierarchical structure of what does the CEO say, who tells the boss, who tells the boss, who tells the boss, who comes and finally gets down to me. And I'll just do that, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about a completely, multi-dimensional communication and action and empowerment, and basically everyone is fully engaged in what they do.
And leadership in this case is helping everyone be able to play.
Right.
The leadership is actually stronger because the whole organism is so much stronger.
Are you hearing this, leaders? I know there's some leaders, at least one leader out there listening to us, wondering how can they get their team to work better. Listen to Bill. Bill knows what he's talking about. So, all right, so there's the two components you talked about were empathy, team building, which is critical, and the next thing is?
This new definition of leadership.
Right.
Where there are, 6 billion people and an almost infinite number of combinations of people, and you have to see that. Here's a really big opportunity. That's the skill of change making, the first part. And then you've got to build a team of teams and help it work together and help all the people be able to work together. So this is a very sophisticated type of leadership. And that's why all three of these things you've got to start and practice early and know that you have a set of skills. So here's an analogy, a historical analogy. The rate of change really took off around 1700. 150 years later, we said we need everyone, same word, to be literate in written language. We need people to read street signs. We need them to be able to send memos
in the
back
same
and
language.
forth. That's the Tower of Babel problem is still with us, but we just needed that. Now, pretty much everyone agreed after a while. We've never agreed about how to do it. What we're saying is that another 150 years, the rate of change going up exponentially, we need everyone to be a change maker. You can't play in a game where the value is contributing to change unless you can contribute to the value. And if you disrupt and hurt people, you're out. You can't, if the game has become hockey, you can't play basketball.
So, Bill, let me ask you, what had you start Ashoka? And for those of you listening, it's spelled Ashoka, and their website is ashoka.org. But tell me the story. I'm interested.
So I was in India. I was 18, 19, and the statistics started being people I knew. And what do? This is 100 to 1 difference at that point between the average per capita income in India and the U.S. Well, sophomores control nothing. So better be highly leveraged.
So wait, so you went to India when you were 18, 19 years old, and you saw abject poverty? Or you just saw the difference in income? I'm
reacting against the word abject because...
Okay, what did you see?
But people with many fewer opportunities, many.
Right.
Good families, people who are very good to one another. But if you don't have education and you don't have health care and there's no road to the village, et cetera, those are big disadvantages. And so growing up here with the most amazing advantages, and here's this other society that had just given America the greatest gift. We had failed to deal with slavery all through our history, and through Bayard Rustin to Martin King, we had the Gandhian methodology. And we actually changed in really profound ways. And so I was growing up during the civil rights period and in a small way contributed. Here is this amazingly powerful society, as big, as historic, as complicated as Western society put together. And you have this amazing difference in opportunities for people. So how do you change that? Well, as a sophomore, you have to ask, what's the most highly leveraged thing? Well, what is it? It's a big pattern change idea, but only if it's in the hands of a great entrepreneur. It's that combination that moves history. Okay, well, there are lots of institutions to support business entrepreneurs, but at that point, there wasn't even a word to describe social entrepreneurs, people who bring fundamental change in education, human rights, all the areas of social concern. So that's where the idea came from. If we could help the most important big pattern change ideas in the hands of really excellent social entrepreneurs, meaning entrepreneur changing the pattern across the whole society, the person committed from deep within to the good of all, and therefore the work. Well, if we can do that at the moment in the life cycle where the idea is ready and the person is ready, they then have to step out of their existing jobs because they need to work at this full time and make the prototype work and refine it and then figure out how to spread it. So what the central insight is really simple. If you can help those ideas and those people at that moment a very tiny amount of money, and then the community has a huge impact. And you cited one of the statistics that over half have changed national policy within 5 years. Well, 3/4 have changed the pattern in the field. 94% have had independent institutions copy them within 5 years. So they're really bringing, this is not local delivery, this is major pattern change. It's very powerful. And the community of those people helping one another is even more powerful.
And what hooked you? Was it the 60s that you just were inspired by the popular changemakers or the movement? What was it that hooked you?
Well, it's a typical story for all of us. In elementary school, I could not imagine why I was being tortured by math and Latin and all this stuff. I loved history and geography.
We're going to hear more in just a second. We'll be right back after this break. Okay, and we're back. You're listening to You're Hired, and we're talking to our guest, Bill Drayton. Bill, tell us.
So, how did I get on this path? Same story as virtually all the major social entrepreneurs or business entrepreneurs. So, my parents both did something wildly irresponsible at 19. They had that inner confidence, so your family is always important.
What did they do?
Well, my dad left college to become an explorer, and my mom arrived here in the Depression as a cellist, knowing nobody. I mean, it's completely impractical, but they had that inner confidence. And then I grew up in Manhattan. And, once you're allowed to cross the street, you have a free bus and subway pass. You can go anywhere. Everything's in the city. It's got a high energy. You can get things done. It's a very powerful culture. You add the civil rights. The country is actually causing this thing to change. I mean, it was an amazing series of gifts. So I really didn't do much Latin. And I am not built for touch football or any type of football, as you can tell. So I was always the crashee, and that's not a great deal of fun.
The crashee?
Yes.
What's the crashee?
The person who is crashed into.
You were the one who got tackled.
If you're my build, this is not ideal.
Right. So you saw the things you could not do.
Or didn't want to do.
Or didn't want to, yeah.
But so I started things. I started hand-typed newspaper, and then I saved up and got a mimeograph, and it grew and became multi-school, etc. Well,
so your first business was a newspaper?
Yes. My parents were very worried. Why is our son not at home? Not in the school when he's supposed to be. The principal was, I didn't know this until later, but he said this was the best thing for me to do, and he was very, very supportive. So I had the gift, all those gifts. And so I was an entrepreneur, had my power at that point, knew it. It's just the most amazing gift.
And when did you start Ashoka?
That was the first fellows were the spring of '81. We were incorporated in 1980, but we sensed that the historical moment was, we could see it coming in the late 70s.
So I wanted to talk about, I'd love to hear more about this story, but I want to also talk about this tax thing. So one of the reasons I have Bill in, and I talked about it earlier, is that my father-in-law is a schooled economist. And he's written tons of books on the systems that we have and how the systems that we have, particularly around multinational corporations, don't serve us. So I talked to him. His name's David Corton. He's a really amazing guy, and if you haven't read about him, you should. We were talking about the unemployment number, and I want to talk to you about this because this is where he said, I should talk to you. I see this employment number. I've seen it my whole life on the news. I hear about it. I've seen it. I went to business school. But I never really understood it. I never really understood it except that it goes up and it goes down and it goes up and it goes down. So what I learned, and you can look at this on Wikipedia, it's very open that the unemployment number, the one that we see, is based on certain criteria, but it is not complete. It doesn't tell the entire story. However, the unemployment number is what drives policymakers, senators and congressmen to make policy around taxes, make policies around creating jobs, all these policies that cost money or don't cost money that affect our lives. So should not this number be more accurate or well understood by the people who it's affecting? And he said, talk to Bill. So let's talk about the unemployment number and the history of the unemployment number and your sense of it right now.
This is another case of framework change. We've been captured by this, as just you were saying, we look at this one number. That number was not chosen by an accident. That's the politically relevant unemployed, the people who get upset and we don't have arrangements for. But there are more than 10 times that number who do not have the option of a job. And if you look at the overall economy, that's over half the adults. So the
history of the unemployment number, it's been measured for about 60 years? Is that right?
I don't remember when it started.
Something like that, 60 or 70 years that they've calculated this out. So and they usually use the same number, but like you're saying, what they're measuring are people who are not working that are kind of troublemakers in a way, the people who are going to vote that have the resources to kind of influence whether or not a particular congressman or senator continues to be in office, but not the people who don't have that. And the assertion, and this is where we were having a discussion, is how big is that number? And I think that we can say it's definitely bigger than the 4 or 5% that people talk about. And so tell me about your notion. So when people say that the unemployment number now is, I think, 4-point-some-odd%, that's not really the people who could be working and could be employed. It's just a small subset of that. And we don't have to go into it here, but you have this, this work that you did at McKinsey and Company, which is, again, a very high-end, sophisticated consulting company, where you looked at these numbers, and the numbers don't lie. So let's talk about that, because I think that kind of paints a picture of like, okay, yeah, clearly there's something wrong here. When we talked about like kind of the number of people that are, the number of people the number of hours people work a year is about 1,800 and change. 2080 is what some people use, but I think you were using 1740. But go ahead.
Well, that's if people are working full time. So first of all, you have the people working full time, and you can define that as 35 hours or 40 hours or whatever. So we take a very conservative 35 hours. Then you have part-time seasonal workers, mainly seasonal, and about 2/3 of that block work less than 1/3 of full-time. Then you have the official unemployment number, which recently is around 7.5 million.
And that number comes from unemployment payments, correct?
It's broader than that. It's anyone who doesn't have a job who's actively looking for a job, i.e. they're not satisfied.
Right.
Potentially a political problem. That's why it's the politically relevant number. The much larger number of adults, no kids under 14, nothing wrong with them physically, totally out of the labor force. Because they're not actively looking, they're not a political problem. But so I'll take that apart. So Lou Harris, the pollsters, who regrettably passed recently, has worked with us for many years on this. And he's looked at, for example, people who are retired. And he finds that 68% of those who are retired, quote, think it was a mistake, end quote. And it's 74% for people with disability. Now, his view is that both those numbers are major understatements because of psychological dissonance. People do not go around being unhappy about something they think they have no control over, and where society is not bugging them about it. go off and enjoy your golden retirement. There's nothing negative in society about that. But, and this is McKinsey statistics coming from 4 insurance companies. If you hold prior health, which you can do well, and personality, which is harder to do, constant, and you compare older people who continue to work versus those who don't, same 40 to 60% more days of health costs paid by insurance companies and 2 years earlier death. Well, this is not great if you're an older person and you don't have the option of working. Now, we also know that this is not a supply problem. In World War II, in the first 2 years, we increased the workforce by 40%. No problem. Remember Rosie the Riveter and all that? And we increased the average work week by 20%. No problem. No supply problem. It's a demand problem. And so we've looked at this from the point of view of each individual group, young people, women, immigrants, people who've been institutionalized. There's a huge political coalition here. Once people see this is the reality.
And one of the ways you can get these folks back to work, there's a tax schema that you're proposing. We have just a few more minutes, but can you cover that a little bit?
Look, this is basic Ec 1. It's really simple. Once you see this reality, the payroll tax is a tax on employment.
And what is the payroll tax so people understand?
It's unemployment, it's railroad retirement, there's a whole bunch of them. And they add up to about 17, in the U.S., about 17%. Now, if you were to take that off the cost of labor, and you were to increase the cost by increasing taxes on energy, land, materials, pollution, things, people versus things, you get a 30% price signal. Higher people conserve. We benefit from both. That simple price signal is worth 45 million full-time permanent jobs, and it's totally acceptable across the political spectrum.
There's a great article that you wrote in 2009 in Innovations. It was the fall of 2009. So if you're interested in learning more about Bill Drayton, you got to read this article. It's called "Engage People and Retire Things," which is it really kind of gets into how we should relate to people and not tax their labor, but rather tax the things that are used to create what it is that we have. Which you propose, what would be the net result, you believe?
Well, in terms of employment, it's 45 million full-time permanent jobs. But it's also, we don't pay these huge dependency costs.
And some of the countries that are doing this now are having better results than we are.
Well, if you look at the advanced economies and you compare those with payroll taxes above 40% versus those below 30%, there's an 11.5% difference in the proportion of the population working. And that's only moving 1/2 of the price change that we propose.
And this is different than income tax, which two different things.
Yes.
There'll still be an income tax. But we're talking about payroll tax.
Which is probably the most destructive tax you can imagine. It's not only obviously regressive because it only applies to people who have, if you have an income above 100 whatever thousand, you don't pay it. But that's easy. But what really happens is if you're an unskilled worker in a lumber yard in Pennsylvania, okay, in theory, some of it's paid by the employer and some by you, but actually it's all paid by you because you don't have a bargaining power.
Right.
We know this empirically. At the other end of the spectrum, if you work for McKinsey or Microsoft, you have all the bargaining power because they're desperate to get people. And so they pay the whole tax. Now,
so I know we only have like a minute left, but I want to ask, how can folks get a hold of you in the organization if they're interested in kind of following up and hearing more about what you do?
GetAmericaWorking.com. with an exclamation point.
Or Ashoka?
Ashoka.org.
Ashoka.org. And how can they reach you directly through those organizations?
Yes, very easily. wdrayton@ashoka.org.
Awesome. Bill, I want to thank you. I wish we had more time, actually, because I do want to talk about this more. This has been a great conversation, and I know that Afote has been engaged. He's been really, really interested. So I hope you, as our audience, have been engaged and connect with Bill's organizations. Definitely connect with them, because you're going to need these skills. These are things that you need to be learning as a piece of the puzzle to develop yourself for the next 10 or 20 or 30 years. Am I right?
Absolutely. So to everyone who's with us, please give yourself permission to be a change maker and help your kids be change makers and your friends. It's the biggest gift you can give anyone.
Awesome.
So thank you.
Yeah, and on that, this is the conclusion of this week's episode of You're Hired. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week here on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia.